You are entering the Nihiliverse with your hosts Gustavo Candia and Rodney Perry. This episode has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. No.
Well, good morning, Gustavo.
Good morning, Rodney.
I see you're wearing a Statue of Liberty on your shirt.
Well, it's actually, if we look more closely, I wasn't sure. It's actually a cat, right? And it says,
now I see.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of fluffiness.
You're staying being deep today, huh?
Yeah.
That's fun. That's you being fun. That's good.
That's right.
There's a philosophical school of Hinduism that after long analysis basically comes down to saying that the purpose of the world is to play.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about that, right? The scientists, maybe are most, maybe not productive, but they're most inspired when they play, right?
Right. Oh, yes, right. I forgot about that.
To be inspired.
Playfulness is part of insight.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, today is we're going to enter into a new chapter called Nihilitive Knowing. I often am reminded that we need to make sure that the people who are listening and reading aren't confused by these big words. They're not all so big once you use them a few times. But nihilitive is just the adjective having to do with nothing. Nihil means nothing. So nihilitive knowing is a kind of knowing that allows you to what we call imperience nothing.
Right.
And we'll get along into that. But the beginning of this chapter is starting a long road toward our coming up with a descriptor of how nothing can be known. Mm-hmm. So in the world of science and philosophy, it's epistemology, the logic of knowing, epistemology. So that's what we're talking about now. And we're going to talk about epistemic pathways, which is a big word. It just means ways of approaching knowing things. So that's what we're sort of doing today. And we're going to go somewhere very clearly in this whole area, which is, I think, nice. We kind of know where we're going. Mm-hmm. And we're going to look at science and religion and talk about these various ways of knowing the world. And we're going to particularly end up with two areas. One is that we're going to talk very clearly about faith as a heuristic, meaning faith as a way of helping you know things.
Right.
And it's an interesting discussion because faith usually in that discussion is usually called belief. Mm-hmm. Belief is often opposed to knowing.
Right.
Knowing and belief are opposed. And it's quite clear if you look closely without being too angry or having a real clearly side on this faith versus knowing argument, that many people, scientists, psychologists, and people of religion have said that faith is a very basis for knowing things.
Right.
You are faithful, and within that faith, you become a better knower. And we'll see how that's functioning in science as well as religion. So that's where we're going. And I thought maybe we could go right into Schrodinger's cat and talk about how consciousness, being conscious, affects how we know the world, because it's a classic and it's really hard to understand sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm certainly no expert, right? I graduated with an engineering physics degree, right? It was I was more interested in the engineering side of it than the physics side of it. But the edges of science always interested me, right? And at the edge of science here, the quantum mechanics has always been fascinating, right? It's just so counterintuitive, right? It takes years, decades, right, to really wrap your mind around some of these ideas, because the way that the world works or looks from the subatomic perspective is completely different than the way that we generally experience the world, right? I think last week we spoke about the uncertainty principle, right? About how when we measure something, right, what we do is we disturb the state of that thing, right? And the reason is because we need something to measure with, right? And say that the thing that is least likely to disturb, or the thing that's weakest to disturb the state of something is say like 1 photon of light, but a photon of light carries some energy, right? And
Right.
so remember, like, I mean, if we think back to physics, right? It's a unit of light sort of hits something, bounces off that thing, and is registered by an observer, right?
Right.
But you see that prior to observing, it's that signal has to bounce off of the thing that you're measuring,
Right.
so that
Exactly.
you can observe. And that little ping, that little hit, disturbs the system. Now, it doesn't disturb bodies like you and I, because we're so massive
Right.
that you know, we hardly budge, right?
Yeah, what's a photon? You know?
Yeah, right. What's a photon? Nothing, right? But for electrons, that's not the case, right? They you know, that little ping does affect the state of the electron, so much so that its behavior, you know, can change dramatically, right? What once was measured to be a wave, right? The behavior of the set of electrons was wave-like, when maybe upon measurement, right, becomes more discrete or particle-like.
Right.
Okay, and that's evidenced by the double slit experiment, most famously. You know, let's sort of talk a little bit more. Let's talk about this idea of a just very briefly of a wave function, right? Quantum mechanical wave function, which is roughly speaking, it's like a probability landscape. Okay, think of it as just a wave on a you know, in a placid lake, right? You drop a stone into that lake, and it's going to create a wave form, right?
That's right.
As it spreads across the lake.
Yeah.
So that waveform, right? There's a correspondence between that waveform and the probability of a particle being found at that spot, right? So the higher the peak at a certain spot, the greater the probability that something be found there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, there was this famous sort of thought experiment that was brought to the fore, I believe in the 30s or 40s, and that was it's called Schrodinger's cat. And the thought experiment goes roughly like this: it's there's an elaborate setup, right, where inside of a box there's a vial of very deadly poison, okay, with a little hammer that, say for instance, has the probability of there's a like 50% chance that the hammer, right, upon sort of striking the vial, will break and release this poison into the atmosphere of the box, right? Now you place, let's say, a cat inside of that box,
right?
Okay, and you have nothing. There's nothing that signals what's going on inside of the box to the outside, to the scientists studying the system.
Right.
Okay, so at any given point, right, that hammer can strike the vial, and that vial could break and release the poison, right? What do we consider that cat, once it's placed in the box and there for a certain amount of time? Do we consider the cat alive, or do we consider it dead?
Yeah.
Okay, and so classically, right? Classically, the idea is, well, the cat is either alive or dead, but quantum mechanically, right? And counterintuitively,
right.
The cat is in some superposition of both alive and dead states.
That's right.
Okay. And it has to do with this probability wave function, right? So there's some sort of like height of the wave that's going in through that box that will give you a certain probability of it being alive and a certain probability of it being dead. But it's neither. This thought experiment, it illustrates what's called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. Right. So quantum mechanics is a physical theory, right, which has been interpreted in many ways. The most, I guess, the way that it's been interpreted, that's been, I guess, adopted by most scientists, is what is called the Copenhagen interpretation. Okay. And that says that the physical systems, right? So if you hold the Copenhagen interpretation, you believe that physical systems generally don't have definite physical properties prior to being measured.
That's right.
Okay, and so the translation to that is that reality is determined only upon observing reality.
That's right.
Okay, and that's the position that most scientists take post quantum mechanics.
Right. That's right.
All right. Now, it's funny. So like I've been exposed to this for over like maybe 20 years, right? This idea of quantum mechanics, and a couple of years ago, I had a thought. So I had a twist to the thought, the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, and I dubbed it this twist to the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, Schrodinger's catch. And here's the catch. Okay, here's the catch. Right, instead of placing a cat inside of the box, right, what happens if we place a human being inside of the box? Now think about this, right? Now, the human being, right, we assume to be, it's conscious, right? And so for the human being inside the box, he or she would know whether he or she is alive or dead. Right? Right? The scientists outside
won't know.
They won't know, and so maybe the best that they can do is say it's some superposition of alive and dead states.
Mm-hmm.
But there's certainly a reality for the person inside the box.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I guess what this Schrodinger's catch twist, which by the way, I found out I'm not that smart. This has been thought of before. It's called Wigner's friend. Okay, this twist to
yes. I think I've read about. I never knew what Wigner's friend meant, though.
Okay, so Wigner's friend is this exact idea, this exact twist to Schrodinger's cat.
Putting a person in the box.
Putting a person in the box, because why does that make it things different? Because we don't ascribe to a cat consciousness in the same way that we ascribe to human beings. Right. So it kind of gets washed like that. Oh yeah, okay, fine. I can believe that the cat is neither alive nor dead. Right. It's in some sort of superposition, but it's harder to accept. It's harder to accept the Copenhagen interpretation.
Yes.
Right, of quantum mechanics if a human being is inside.
That's
because the human being that is inside knows whether he or she is inside. Okay.
Well, yeah.
So what Schrodinger's catch or Wigner's friend sort of illustrates is that, or calls to question for the Copenhagen interpretation, is what counts as a measuring device, right?
Right.
The cat was used for the thought experiment, right? But because it's not, or because many people would could sort of let it pass that, okay, the cat's not conscious, right? But maybe it's the case that virtual particles in some way can be said to be in some future, right? Could be found to be conscious in some way, right? So that just there being virtual particles in this box could crash the wave function. This idea of crashing wave function, of spiking the wave function, is like when we observe it, it becomes a particle, right? So it's a wave, right? Until we observe something, and then it spikes and becomes a particle.
That's right.
Okay, so perhaps, right? A cat could be conscious, right? Or even virtual particles could be conscious. In which case, right? Being inside the box and outside the box leads to there's a discontinuity, right, of waveform. So that being inside the box, you experience like a different wave. It's not a different wave function, but it's a different waveform, right? Than the waveform from the outside. Okay.
That's right.
And just to wrap it all up, right? So the problem with science is that if you're always looking from the outside in, right? You might be sort of missing, right? Like sort of what's like, going on inside, right? Like you might not, like your ignorance of the state. Maybe that's the most that you can say, right? Being outside of the box, but that doesn't describe the reality, right? That doesn't describe what's going on inside the box, right? And
Huh.
it doesn't take away from the reality of
Oh, the box.
of what's going on inside the box. Yes,
Huh.
we can always place some conscious being or entity inside of whatever system we're trying to observe, right?
Huh.
In a way, invalidating, right? This Copenhagen interpretation, right, of whatever of whatever system that you're studying, right? Like yeah. So the idea is that we can never sort of there's always going to be sort of a possibility that there's some consciousness inside of whatever system that we're studying, so it kind of nullifies, right, all these ideas of this quantum this Copenhagen interpretation of mechanics.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's great. I never heard that kind of thing before.
Yeah,
it reminds me of something. I don't. We were thinking about maybe doing something with Karl Popper. I don't know if we'll get to him later in the day, but I was just looking at some Popper earlier, and one of his most famous quotes is he says, "Science may be described as the art of systematic oversimplification."
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
Which is so great. This whole thing about making the complicated simple so that it can be quantified and understood. Whereas when you throw in the catch, then Schrodinger's cat kind of falls apart.
That's right. That's right. Very good. Nice summation. That's right.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, the Turing test and Schrodinger's cat have driven people wild with thought for so long and trying to figure it all out. So it's an interesting note. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one thing I wanted I just noticed there, because it's exactly what I was going to be talking about with you. Is you said you were mostly interested in the edges of science.
Yes.
Which is really an interesting notion, because that's a very spatial understanding of what you're interested in. Science is a certain realm, and I'm interested in what's happening just outside or right at the edge as it starts to turn into maybe another sort of understanding. So
to continue along that visualization, it's spatial, certainly, and I actually visualize it more like that there's like a bubbling or an effervescence at the edges. And these bubbles at the edges, most of them just pop and fizzle out, but some of them become their own bubbles. Okay, and they grow and into their own theories.
They become their own form of knowing and their own theory.
Yeah,
and that's kind of interesting too. That's a great image.
Yeah,
it's a great image. Yeah. So anyway, I was thinking maybe where we could go in just for a few moments is talk about what science has told us, what philosophy of science and so forth has told us about kinds of knowing, because the kinds of knowing we will use in critique of the popularizers as we go along. And so, now, generally speaking, the philosophers of knowledge have one of the classic ways of dividing up knowledge is into objective, subjective, is intersubjective knowing. And that's usually called a typology, a kind of a list of sorts that is kinds of knowing. And I realize that one of our great tools, one of the things that we seem to understand, is that having a spatial question about certain aspects of science and philosophy is very helpful sometimes. And so this question, approaching things from the question of where as opposed to types, we changed it to a topology, thinking of it as like a map. You get that spatial map, and so we can ask about knowledge from a sort of topological perspective, meaning where. And so we ask this question of the three kinds of knowledge. We ask it, well, where does it reside? So first of all, well, I should say that as we go along, this where question is very important, because it shows itself. For instance, when we use the phrase that that nothing resides off the edge, off the cliff edge of various continuums, off the cliff edge of physicality, off the mind, and so forth. That's a spatial image.
Right.
of where nothing lies. And we also talk a lot later on about the self, the human self. And we talk about it in terms of where it resides in the body. So that where question, I find, is another tool we're offering to the readers and to listeners. These various tools you can put in the end, you'll have a nice toolbox and you'll understand nothing. So where is another question.
Well, because
So
scientists want to know where. It's a question that scientists often ask themselves, right? When studying physical systems, right? So this is a way of speaking to that kind of a mind, right?
Yeah,
a mind that is always looking for where I can find this.
Right. Where is the multiverse anyway?
Right. Where is it?
Yeah. So just simply, we'll look at the three kinds of knowing. The first one is, objective truth is the realm of science. You always hear scientists talk about objective truth. Objective truth is constant. It doesn't change over time. Objective truth is often talked about in terms of propositions. The language of science is, I understand that, so and so and so and so. And, they're in terms of propositions, this word proposition. I propose that E equals MC squared, or I propose that 6 times 4 is 24, and so forth. Those are forms of objective truth. One of the hallmarks of objective truth is that it's verifiable. And the scientists are always searching for truth that is verifiable. Can it be tested out there in the world and found to be true by another, as well as what you have proposed, and so forth. So, where does objective truth reside? Objective truth is an individual looking at the world, the reality around them, the outer world. It is an understanding of a realm that is outside of the person, outside of the body, and the verification occurs outside the body. So again, you can come up with, even within this definition, you can see how the where question really works, because you can envision objective knowledge being outside of your body. It's out there in the world. Okay, let's just do it quickly so we can move on. A subjective understanding is the truth of an individual person. Subjective understanding doesn't have to be the same throughout time and so forth, but in fact changes according to the person that is having it. And subjective truth, of course, is not verifiable in the outer world. Subjective truth is not the kind of truth that scientists like to talk about. In fact, they don't like that kind of truth. Okay, so objective truth, objective knowing is the way I like to talk about it. Objective knowing comes in the form of, I understand that. Subjective knowing comes in the form of, I feel that. It moves it internally. It moves into the realm of feeling. So subjective truth is often talked about, you hear this phrase, a gut feeling. It's a sense that you have internally. In fact, there's a lot of science that talks about subjective truth as a very physically based understanding, that these feelings have a kind of physical component to it. Exactly. And so the question is then, so where does subjective truth reside? The subjective truth resides internal to the body. It can be a gut feeling about, let's say oftentimes you have a subjective feeling about art, for instance. You can have an aesthetic, you can be doing an aesthetic understanding. I like this painting better than that painting, or this painting is more beautiful than that painting, and so forth. But the experience is internal, and the verification of the knowing is internal. Okay, so what we've got is a objective truth being an out there, subjective truth being an in here. So the third form is actually kind of what's very important in our further critique of Pops as we go along, and that is intersubjective truth. I think it's easy to say that intersubjective truth is a social endeavor. It's not internal to an individual, it's not external to an individual, but is in the social interaction of individuals. So there was a famous book, it's Joseph Bracken's book, it's called Subjectivity, Objectivity, and Intersubjectivity a new paradigm for religion and science. And he goes deeply into this discussion about how religion and science can work with these three sorts of truth. But he talks about intersubjective truth, as he calls it, a common field of activity. It's easy to understand intersubjective truth. It is the common sense that a group shares. And that common sense can become so obvious to a group that it's not even thought about whether it's true or not. It's just taken for granted within the group. And I noted in our book, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and so forth. So we the people of the United States take that for granted. That is an intersubjective truth. It's so obviously true that we don't even consider it anymore. Right. So it is something that is collectively understood. So there's one more thing that I want to do, and it's important about this spatial understanding. So Edmund Husserl, I think he died back in the 30s or so. He was a famous man in philosophy, and he wrote this book called Cartesian Meditations. I should just note, I remember, I never understood, Cartesian means relative to Descartes. Right. That means, so we don't say Descartesian, we just say Cartesian because of the way French works and so forth. So Cartesian means talking about René Descartes. Husserl said this really interesting thing. He's talking about intersubjective truth. He's saying that intersubjective truth becomes this whole complex of meanings that develops into what he called a Heimwelt for the group. Heimwelt is German for home world. And it's such a perfect use of our notion of where. So intersubjective truth becomes the world that our group feels at home in. Right. And that is the perfect where question for intersubjective truth. So it is so true that it's the truth for everyone, and it's the place where we feel comfortable. That's a very important notion for when we talk about popularizers of science. So the objective knowing occurs in the outside world, subjective knowing occurs within, and intersubjective knowing exists in the interaction of human beings. Now, one of the things that we talk about later on in the book very clearly that we use to critique the popularizers of science is that when popularizers of science start talking about very rarefied notions that are taken for granted, for instance, that the universe comes from nothing, for instance, that the universe is constituted of 3 spatial dimensions. It is from our perspective as writers, you and I writing the book on nihilology, these are not objective truths. These are subjective. These are intersubjective truths. Right. The group of popularizers of science have all agreed to the point where you don't even have to consider it anymore that these things are true. And we found that there is often a conflation of objective, subjective, and intersubjective. And oftentimes when popularizers of science are saying objective, they're actually giving us a perfect example of intersubjective truth. Right. The home world of popularizers of science. Right. So that's sort of where we're going. That's a kind of an idea. And we can use that as we go along. The where quality of a lot of things is a very helpful way of understanding them. So I just wanted to go through that. I think it's pretty clear and pretty helpful as we go along.
Right. So, the home world term, I think it was something that I'd been exposed to in my master's studies, but it never really stuck with me, but it's so relevant to this section of the book. The philosophy of science term that did stick with me was paradigm, which is roughly the same thing, but doesn't connote. It's not as effective, right? In this instance, right, for describing what we're really pointing to, right? So if I was forced to translate, the home world, right, to the paradigm, I'd say that the home world, right, is what we would understand to be a social paradigm. Okay,
That's right. Right.
And homeworld, right, is Husserl. Paradigm popularized by Thomas Kuhn, right?
Right.
Now, before Kuhn, there is Popper,
Right, exactly.
Karl Popper. Okay, and,
sure.
and we have a clip here for Hop on Pop. Right?
Oh, cool. Okay, so we'll do Popper. We'll do Hop on Pop for Popper.
Hop on Popper.
Okay,
Hop on Popper here, and we'll see sort of what he has to say about truth and certainty and the like.
Okay, great, cool.
Okay, so here we go. Let's first share.
The main instigation for the search of truth is really that we see new problems. The discovery of new problems can be more important than the solution of the problem. I think this is perhaps the most important thing in science, and is the result of an attitude which does not go for certainty, but goes for where we fail, for the uncertainty. There are the problems where we do not find satisfaction, certainty. There we should go on digging.
All right, so you abandon certainty as an object because, in effect, it's a block. It's the idea that you can achieve certainty obstructs what the mind ought to be doing, pursuing ever deeper into the knowabilities of the world, without any assumption that it'll ever finally conclude its search. Fine, but it's all very well to say the alternative is to search for truth, but to know that we're doing this more or less right, that we're pushing in the right direction in this search, don't we have to have some alternative to certainty, something in the nature of truth-likeness, probability, confirmation, support, justification, all ideas about which you've been very critical? Don't we need something like that to show us that we're pointed in the right direction?
We have to replace it by the search for truth in the form of criticism. We have constantly to criticize our own theories, our own interpretations. And criticism of this kind, which I have in mind, could be called rational criticism, because it is criticism of our own theories in the interest of truth. It must be impersonal, completely impersonal criticism. It is criticism which asks itself, have we not made a mistake? Have we not overlooked something? Can we not find fault in what we have thought, interpreted, constructed, or whatever? It is criticism, as it were, from inside, in the sense that it is a criticism directed to improving our knowledge. The knowledge which we have may be faulty and therefore should be improved through criticism. One can compare this to the following. The search for certainty is like erecting a wall around your castle and build the wall higher and higher and higher. It will never be quite high enough to establish certainty. So we have to buy a watchdog. Then we don't need such a high wall, and the watchdog looks from inside. That is this internal criticism which I have in mind.
Okay, let's stop there.
What a great character, huh?
Oh yeah, honestly, like if I recall, like I think Karl Popper is the first, and I'm probably wrong here, right? But the first man that you could sort of point to and say, okay, that he identified as being a philosopher of science, right? Of course, many scientists did philosophy of science.
Yes.
Many scientists have done philosophy of science. Many philosophers have done philosophy of science, right? But you could sort of, Popper is really like the first that you can sort of point to, I think, and say that he was a philosopher of science. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, you spoke about like the verifiable propositions, right? And that science pursues verifiable propositions, and he says as much here. He talks about new problems, right, being more important than new solutions, right? That I guess making like it's more important to push the bubble to be bigger than it is to define the edges of the bubble that you have, in a sense, right? So I thought that's an interesting sort of quote from Popper. And his stressing here in this video clip to abandon certainty. He's calling scientists to abandon certainty, abandon the idea of attaining certainty. Right? Our theories cannot be certain.
Right. Exactly.
And he goes as far as to say pursuing certainty obstructs what a scientist should be doing.
Isn't that interesting?
Which is problem solving by trial and error.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So the scientist is a problem solver, right? He's looking to verify certain propositions, but actually more specifically, he's looking to falsify, right? Trial and error. Right? Trying to find the errors in the existing theory, right? By pushing and always questioning, always criticizing, as he's saying, right? Is there somehow where I could have gotten this wrong?
Right.
And I guess the last little bit that I have here, maybe as a way of visualizing sort of what Popper is saying, is that to scientists, right, pursue this idea of precision with your theories, right? Yeah. Where precision, remember, is a match with other existing theoretical constructions. How well does this match other theoretical constructions? Right. Whereas accuracy, reserve that for some other people. Let other wacky people try to deal with accuracy, which accuracy, right, is a match with truth. Okay. Right. So if I to put a visual to this, think of a dartboard. Okay. Now, if all the darts go if they're all like, if you actually play darts, you know that the highest point total is not the bullseye. The highest point total is actually triple 20, right? Which is the inner band of the 20. It's 60 points, whereas the double bull is 50 points. Right. So you'll see that if you ever watch darts, right, people are aiming to the triple 20 band, not the bullseye, for the most part. Okay, because that's the you can get the highest point total that way. Okay? Now you see that what they're doing is they're being precise, right? They're being precise relative to the dartboard in that all the darts are going to that one spot, right? Though that one spot doesn't correspond to the center of the dartboard. Right? Does not correspond to the where accuracy would mean how close are your darts relative to the center of the dartboard, right? The scientists should be aiming for the highest point total, in a sense, right? Not what is the center of the of the board. Let some other group look for the center of the board.
That's a great image. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was true.
Yeah,
it's interesting that the image of the bullseye has just been so central.
You think that's where everybody should be aiming, right?
Right, exactly. That's
watch. In fact, you know what? Forget about watch for this reason, right? But it's fun to watch darts. These guys, the crowds that go see these dart players, they get so riled up. The highest point total for any three dart three dart set is 180, right? And they all have signs of 180. When a dart thrower throws three darts and they all hit the triple 20, right? They all start going crazy. 180, you know. And the crowd goes bananas. If a dart player threw 150, nobody would be shaking any flags. They're exuberant for the 180, right?
That's great.
So yeah, let's keep shooting for that triple 20. Keep shooting for that triple 20. Leave the bullseye for somebody else.
That's great. Good. We can't go any further than that. That's as far as it goes.
All right. Okay, great. Okay, so I think with that we'll leave it.
That was great. That was really fun.
Okay.
See you next week.
See you. Bye-bye.
Entering the Universe has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. Until next time. No.